an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Afterparty, Season 2, Episode 5, Sebastian. In this episode, we find out that Sebastian isn't really British. Or is he? I don't know how much of this guy's story I want to believe. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Max for commissioning this episode. All right, so I had theorized that what if he's putting on the British accent and he isn't even British last time, but I really didn't think that was it. I really expected that he was just really good at imitating an American accent. It turns out that he is good at a variety of accents, as it turns out. And I didn't, as I said in the intro, he is claiming that he isn't from the UK, that he managed to scam his way into a private school. And as much as that sounds delightful, as much as this guy presents himself as a kid who basically had no family supervising him at all, as it's from the way it looks, I have a really hard time swallowing that. And this is, it's unclear for me how much I should bring in what I know of the real world to the way things operate on, according to him, because faking your way into a school, I'm not saying it can't be done. And considering his age, at the time that he was attempting to get into a school, it would probably still have been a lot easier to fake than it would be today. There were still expectations of things being faxed, printed out, and actually mailed through the mail. Now, so many things are digital that it can actually be more difficult because they're able to reach out to institutions themselves instead of asking for you to contact them and send something on their behalf. And so I'm not saying that it is an impossible thing, but usually when you are trying to get into a private school, there is not only a lot of paperwork that has to be done, but also interviewing of the parents. And I found this out, I didn't try to scam my way in, but when I was in high school and I realized that they were going to be cutting the arts programs at my school and that some of the things that were bringing me the most joy were not going to be happening at all for my senior year, I got pretty pissed. And I was just like, you know what? Fuck these guys. And I went and applied without asking my parents to a private school in California, which is where I wound up going. But I didn't get to just apply. They told me I could come and then I was able to just go. I applied and then they called my parents about my application. I didn't know they were going to do that, or else I probably would have told my parents earlier that I had done it. So imagine my mom's surprise when she gets a call from a school in California when we're living in Connecticut saying that they saw my application and were very interested and they were willing to give me a $22,000, it was a $22,000 scholarship for a $25,000 school year. So it was almost a full boat scholarship. And I really they had to talk with my parents about the logistics of how I would get out there, the kind of contact I would have with them, the lodgings. They needed to get a lot of things straightened out and okayed before I was able to even accept the offer. And then there was all kinds of connecting up with my parents' bank accounts for the allowance, because they have a general store. There's a whole lot that they need in order to get you in. And I just have a hard time swallowing that he was able to just scam his way in and continue to like be a sort of independent player as if parents weren't a factor at all. And I noted this also in Hannah's recollection of everything. We don't get a good explanation of who Sebastian is and where he's from. She doesn't mention that Sebastian went to school with Edgar. She doesn't, like, there's nothing about where he came from. So either it could be that he is a school friend and that was just so unremarkable that she doesn't say a thing about it. Or it could be that she doesn't really know, or she's hiding something for him. But from where I'm sitting at the moment, this is fishy. I just don't really feel like I'm buying this. And a part of me is kind of thinking that maybe he is from the UK, but pretending that he isn't. And decides that he's going to like write this whole little like American soap story. Soap story? Is that the wording I want? You know what I'm talking about though. Because like, as it turns out, I was thinking that we were going to get a sort of James Bondish style. And instead we get an Ocean's 11 style POV, it was really fun. I really, really enjoyed it. It was not what I was expecting. And it works if you're doing something like, if you're trying to set yourself up as an American con artist type. But it just feels a little too, like, it really does remind me of the way that Jasper's story was so over the top and cinematic feeling. It just seems like there's a lot of flashiness to it that is sort of meant to distract from looking at any of the details too closely. And I couldn't help but also feel like the fact that Jasper shows up in this episode just for a moment, but nevertheless, I kind of was like, is this meant to be a little bit of a like nudge? Like, you know, this is the guy that was guilty last time and he's showing up here, and maybe notice that. It may just not be that at all, but we'll see. So let's start from the beginning, because we're all hanging out in the living room of the house. It is dead silent. And the only person that seems to be like sort of comfortable with things is Travis, who's working on a crossword puzzle from the newspaper. Everybody else is literally just sitting and staring at each other. And Grace finally yells, like, it's so quiet. Can somebody just say something? And Isabel says, oh, is my quiet contemplation of my son's death not chatty enough for you? I honestly am like really enjoying Isabel. As much as she's awful, I really think she's quite fun. And this actress is doing a great job with her. I really love her. When she says, let's play a parlor game, and she does this like weird little like boogie down motion, I was like, what is that? I just love it because it feels so incongruous. So this is when she accuses Grace again. And Zoe is like, you know, you're accusing her when the poison came from your daughter's garden. And evidently, this isn't something that has been shared yet. She's just throwing this out there, and it's the first time that anyone in the room, it appears, is hearing this information. And you see Zoe's parents looking at each other in alarm, which it turns out later is because they took the centerpieces because their mom is cheap and cannot bear to waste things, which totally tracks for me. That was my immediate assumption, because we saw that she wanted to reuse the table settings, or not the centerpieces, from the rehearsal dinner for the wedding. And I was just immediately like, oh, okay, she took them. Like, what are you going to do with them? I don't know. But as somebody who is also just very conscious of waste, I remember one time being on a walk with my friend Lace, and I don't even remember where we were, but we took a detour somewhere weird and wound up in a park where they were hosting this huge event in tents with these women in amazing hats and all of these gorgeous, deeply colored rose centerpieces. And we were walking by and we were just enchanted with the whole thing and walked right up and we were peering into the tents and stuff. And the event was ending and these women came out and they were like, hey, do you want, and they handed us some centerpieces and we're like, do you want to take these home? And we were like, oh my God, yeah. And it was just like we hit the lottery. We were so delighted with it. And it was, it was just like something that was literally going to be thrown away, but it meant the world to us. So yeah, I do not doubt at all that that's why their mother kept them. I am not suspicious of this in like any particle of me. But Ulysses, he knows what devil's trumpet is. He says, I've only heard of it used as a psychotropic aid. And he says the Aruk shaman of Chile brew it in small doses to induce visions, at which point Isabel says, we get it, you travel. Thank you, Isabel. Appreciate you. Really do. And she's like, so what are you suggesting, that my adopted daughter murdered her own brother? Hannah, did you murder Edgar? No. There you have it. And I really do enjoy that she just assumes if she says no, like she takes her word for it completely. And honestly, as much as we hear later when Hannah says to Grace, I told them about us, but I didn't tell them everything. And I said, this isn't the whole story. There's holes here. Like this doesn't make sense. I still don't think Hannah is really the murderer. I'm just not buying it. If she is, I love that I've been fooled, but I just don't think so. I'm really understanding why Isabel would take Hannah at her word, because she just feels like the kind of person who says what she means. I don't know. So then she asks Vivian, did you kill my son? And Vivian says, what? Why would I? And she says, see, that wasn't a no, was it? Which, of course, that was also my reaction, to be honest. Like, don't answer a question like that with a question. It's just a bad look. I get that you think it's justifiable to respond. Like, why would I even do that? And ask because you're like, trying to get them to see that you would have no motive, but worry about that a second later after you've gotten it established. No, of course I fucking didn't, because I really did see why she reacted like, see, she didn't say no about it. Like I just had the same impulse. I did. And then Isabel says, here's an idea. Perhaps you were all in this together. Maybe your family hatched a little get-rich-quick scheme. At which point, Zoe says, we don't want your money. And she gives her a look, and I really, really liked this, you guys. She doesn't just say, everyone wants our money. Because that's the emphasis on everybody, making them sound like the whole world is against us, right? Instead, what she says is, everyone wants our money. And there was something about the way she emphasized our that sounded like she was saying, us specifically, we are a target a lot of the time. Like it felt as if this is not a new thing. Or is she simply saying, you act like you don't want our money just because you don't know how much we have. Like that also could have been, I don't know, but there was just an emphasis in that delivery that I wasn't expecting. And it just kind of caught my attention a little bit. So anyway, that's the cold open. Then we get the intro. And I just want to mention, like, I was sort of not paying that much attention to the animation of the intro before. And I was looking at it a little bit more closely, and I started to realize that like the style of each POV is represented in the way they do the animation. And it was fun to like be able to put that together because you don't catch that the first time, right? It's not until you begin to go through it and see that you're like, oh, okay. But there is a point where there is a candle that is like dripping wax onto a hot woman who's like arching her back in heels. And then you have a moment where this woman is reaching out after a man who's riding away on a horse. And all I could think with that was Ulysses was like having an affair with Vivian. And that is why Feng hates him so much. There was something about the silhouettes, like him on the horse is a given. Her, I feel like that seemed like Vivian. I don't really know why, because really the silhouette looks a lot more like a flamenco dancer or something. But Vivian has like a sort of vibe to her that she's like restrained. Like there's something more flashy than what she's showing. And so that really hit for me. I don't know why. And the last image of all is this dude gesturing to like a van, it looks like where they make meth in like Breaking Bad. That's the look of it, because it's got the popped sunroofs and it's in the middle of what seems to be nowhere. And so I kind of was like, oh, is Ulysses pretending to be this like really well-traveled man of the world, and really he's just a fucking like drug mule or dealer, or, you know, I don't know. But I just wanted to mention that I like actually paid attention to the intro this time in a way that I haven't before. And as far as like the woman who's arching her back and having wax poured on her, I don't think that's Vivian. I'm not sure who that is. Like there's a feeling to that of a femme fatale, and nobody seems to like fit that description here for me, unless maybe it's Isabel. Like, I don't know how that would even work. I don't know. So no guesses on that one. So this is when we go to Anik and Danner, and he is saying like, I really believe that it was Sebastian. And she's like, of course you fucking do, because it would be great if the hot dude that the girl you're into is paying too much attention to, and who is also kind of a shit, also happens to be guilty of murder. And they go up to him and he does a whole like, I don't have to talk to you, I'm going to talk to the cops. And then they're like, yeah, we know that you were fucking fired. And he immediately capitulates and is like, okay, so let's go talk then. And Anik takes an aside to speak to Zoe and ask her how the investigation's going. And she's like, well, Isabella's accusing my sister, and then goes after my mom. And then she's like, oh, maybe my entire family, which means I think now that she did it. And, you know, he's like, well, we've found some evidence about Sebastian. And immediately, I bet they all did it together. And she is just like grasping at straws here. And he has to kind of slow her down and say, okay, yeah, but we'll need to prove that. And she's like, well, that's what I'm going to do. And she just walks away, and I'm just sort of like, I really want to know what you even mean. How? Like, what are you expecting you're going to be able to get done? So this is when they go in to speak with Sebastian. And he says that he asked for my resignation and we kept it a secret, but I didn't kill him. I wasn't even like mad at him after last night. And she's saying, well, if he fired you, why even go to his wedding? Which I hadn't thought of as like, because what I'm thinking is that he got invited because he's a family friend, a lifelong friend. He got fired, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't still mean something to Edgar, or that they don't mean something to each other. So to me, not like coming to the wedding was not at all surprising. And the fact that she asked the question, it sort of caught me aback, because I was just not even, wondering. But anyway, he says, to understand why I'm here, you need to understand my past. We are from very different worlds. He's from old money, and I grew up in a trailer park in San Bernardino. And this is when we find out, like, I just sound British. I'm actually a good old boy from the US of A. And his voice changes, and he has an American accent. Now, again, not entirely sure how much I should be like hand waving this and how much I should be paying attention to it. To me, this is a British actor doing an American accent. This was not an American doing a British accent at all. For me, his American accent is pretty good, but not totally convincing. And his British accent feels way, way more natural. Like, granted, the style of his accent changed depending on whose POV he was in, but I'd put that down to the way he's being perceived by that person, not that his accent actually changes. I really feel this whole like tale. I really don't think, I'm not saying that he didn't grow up poor. I'm not saying that he didn't make some like sketchy friends. I am saying there are some fundamentals about where he comes from that I just don't think he's telling the truth about. And he says, like, I'm faking this accent because it makes me seem charming and intelligent. Who would you rather give money to, this loser or this fellow? And she says, that one, that second one, I definitely would do things to him. And I love that Anik gets so irritated with her throughout this whole interview. And she has to eventually be like, dude, I'm letting him think he charmed me. When people believe they're getting one over on you, they relax and they fuck up. And finally, Anik is like, oh, okay, yeah, that's pretty smart. But he's very salty. He just doesn't want to believe anybody could like this dude because he doesn't want to believe that Zoe is into him. So he says, I came to the wedding because you could say I was after my last score. And we go into his POV, a really heavily saturated color palette, but only a little bit stylized. It feels pretty real to life. And this kid is wearing aviator shades with like a toothpick in his mouth. And he says, I've been pulling jobs ever since I was a kid. Back then, I was a poor nobody from the middle of dirtbag nowhere. And it, again, there's nothing about who's raising him. There's no details at all, really, about who he is. And we see him coming into this convenience store, and he has a couple of friends. They're actually both his cousins, Jackson and Judson, which is hilarious. Judson. And they have like a con that they do. So one of them has all of this, like, what do you call it? One of them opens like a detergent and pours it down the aisle and then drops a bottle to make it look like, oh, that smashed. And he poses like, I just fell in a puddle of soap and smashed my Yoo-hoo. What kind of a store is this? My dad's a lawyer and he'll sue you for everything you've got. And we see him going into this locked cabinet behind the counter as this kid is distracting the shopkeeper. And he takes the whole box of trading cards and the two of them just book it out the back door and they make a getaway on one of their bicycles. And you hear this dude say, you guys are going nowhere. And he replies in the present, but he was right. Pulling cheap cons with my dirtbag cousins was a ticket to nowhere. And there's just something about this that feels so, it's just so generic. Like the general store itself, it feels like a relic. It doesn't seem like it would have existed at a time when this kid was growing up. It feels like something from, The Sandlot or The Body. It feels like we're watching something that happened in the early 80s. And this guy is clearly like really too young for that. I have to assume, like, he looks like he is younger than me And I was born in 84. I would have not been nearly old enough to be pulling this kind of shit during that period. So then he just jumps to, so with some fake test scores and a forged letter of recommendation, I conned my way into a full ride at a fancy boarding school. Again, did you? Okay, sure. And we see him showing up, and he's going to be roommates with Edgar, and he decides that he's going to put on this accent. It turns out Edgar isn't fooled at all. Edgar immediately is like, I mean, not immediately in the scene, because he lets this kid keep going with the accent until later on when he's like, nice touch, but it could use some work. I am going to go ahead right now and say that I think this especially is bullshit. I don't believe Edgar would pick up on somebody faking an accent. I don't think. The way that Edgar seems to think is very, very literal. And cluing in that somebody is faking an accent at all, there are certain like social implications to why someone would do that I don't know he would like, that those implications would occur to him, especially at this age. I could see him eventually, as he grows older, understanding why people would pull shit like this. But I feel like he would probably have been pretty sheltered. And there's a sort of way that he's presented here by Sebastian as like very savvy and kind of the brains of the operation that sounds great and makes it seem like Sebastian was more he says like, I was the face of it. I was the abs and the ass. I just feel like Edgar doesn't give me dishonest vibes. And I think that to a lot of times to pick up that somebody else is being dishonest, you have to either be dishonest yourself, or you have to be like pretty clued in to certain things that I don't feel Edgar always seemed to pick up on. That's not to say that he wasn't observant, because he was. You know, there were times where he says something like to I keep wanting to say Chloe, to Zoe, about how, oh, you laughed at his joke because it was awkward and you were trying to cover the tension, you know? So he does get the reasoning behind things, but he was so young, and the reasoning being like, oh, it's an awkward moment versus there's a whole history to you as a person that I haven't gotten to see yet. And you're attempting to sort of like con me. I don't know why he would think that about Sebastian right out of the gate. What reason would he have to be looking for a scammer in the midst of these students? Is this something that he has run into before? Like, what's the deal? So I don't know. This just feels wrong to me. It doesn't jive with what I thought I knew of Edgar. And I grant you, I may just be very wrong. I may not know Edgar real well. It's, you know, I felt like I got a pretty good sense of him, but this just feels like the Edgar that we saw from Grace's POV and from Hannah's POV. That Edgar matched up pretty well with each other and with Anik's assertion of who Edgar was. This is the first time that I'm seeing an Edgar that doesn't feel familiar. And it could simply be that he presented a different like version of himself to Sebastian. But people who are neurodivergent, they often tend to present pretty similarly. They don't put on and take off hats the same way that neurotypical people do. Because it can be very usual for folks to come across extremely different to their friends versus their coworkers versus their parents. But that takes a certain type of personality and a type of like expenditure of energy that I do not think sounds like Edgar. He wouldn't need to. This is a guy who grew up with a privilege that we can only dream of. And when you have that kind of like certainty and stability behind who you are, that support, you don't need to pretend or alter yourself as a rule. It's not something that you grow up needing to do. And so I just do not feel it would be in his skill set. So anyway, what this all comes down to is this playing card, a Justin Tunder rookie card, which evidently this one had a misprint on it. And it says Justin Turder, which makes it way more valuable. And they play Connect 4 in order to like win. He wants to win the card off of Sebastian, and he actually manages to do it. Sebastian won't play chess because he's like, that's his game. I'll play Connect 4 and I'll definitely be able to pull that off. But in fact, he can't pull that off. And instead of being pissed, he's kind of impressed. He likes the fact that Edgar is able to beat him repeatedly and is sort of like, all right, you know what? This is somebody that I should actually be able to throw in with. Like, he says, in the game of life, Edgar was the house. He got dealt a different hand than the rest of us. If you can't beat the house, you have to become the house. I convinced Edgar to team up. He'd be the brains. I'd be the face. And I just really feel like, if anything, Sebastian played Edgar by pretending to be sincere, and Edgar was going along with what he thought were real business endeavors because he trusted Sebastian and didn't understand how much of a scammer Sebastian was. I think that if there was something shady going on, Edgar didn't know about it. And I know that I'm painting Edgar as being like this sort of complete innocent, and maybe that's not doing him his due. Like, it may be a disservice. It may be infantilizing him. And I don't mean to be doing that, like, based on the fact that he is not neurotypical to be like, oh, he didn't have the capacity to understand. But there are certain tendencies toward the way that people who are on the spectrum especially interact with the world. And not to say that they are not capable of deceit, but I could see being able to trick him more easily than I could see him willingly being prepared to like rip people off. And I'm not even saying necessarily that this whole business operated around ripping people off. But from the way Sebastian's talking, it sounds like that's what he means. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. So, oh my God, I love when she says, I'd love to see all of those, because he says the brains and the ass and the abs. And he says, have you got a warrant? So he says, we were a perfect team, started pulling small cons. And he's naming some you guys. This is one of my favorite bits for this whole thing is the Spanish prisoner, Norsiki twist, even the Mwanda shuffle. The look that he has, I can't help but think that this actor broke like a second after he said that. I feel like he just made these up on the spot. Then after college, we launched the biggest hustle of them all. And it was a hedge fund. Totally legal, built the whole business from the ground up. So yeah, he's implying that like we eventually went straight, but all of it was built on scams. And and I love that he says built with nothing but a $2.4 million loan from Edgar's dad, which I do really enjoy acting like, yeah, we did this completely on our own. And then dropping that in because that is how that fucking works. We were unstoppable, rolling in cash, until Edgar pulled us into crypto. And we see Edgar in front of his keys in his, his sort of weird little safe that's got them lit like they're fucking pieces of kryptonite. I don't know what this is, but we were unstoppable, rolling in cash until Edgar pulled us into crypto. And Edgar lifts one of these keys out and looks at it in a way that suggests to me like he's upset. And saying until he pulled us into crypto sounds to me like we lost everything. That's what it sounds like. And he has an expression on his face like they fucked up and lost a bunch of money. But then Sebastian comes in and says, Eddie boy, I had my doubts, but you were right. Bucephalus is through the roof. And he's just straight up celebrating here. And saying until he pulled us into crypto and then we're celebrating. Those two statements don't feel like they go together. Until sounds like everything was great and then it wasn't. So you're celebrating. Why does he look distressed? And none of this goes together. I don't know. And this is when Edgar comes out and is like, my crypto is worth a lot of money now, though it could have been worth more. You held back 20%, but I told you to invest everything. And he says, come on, man, we had to basically have some backup. We were completely exposed. And he's like, well, your lack of faith was exposed. You cost me millions. You're fired. I think Edgar figured out he was full of shit and doing some other things and fired him for that. This doesn't feel right to me at all. Like, it just doesn't, And he says, crypto is volatile. It's all about perception. And he says, everything is about perception. Take the Mona Lisa. It's a middling portrait of a woman who's a 6 at best. And yet we've all decided it's a priceless masterpiece. And so it is. Does that sound like Edgar to you? I don't know, man. Or take that turd card that I took from you the first day we met. Now, to some, a dog, say, it's just a piece of cardboard. But it has tremendous value because we've assigned it tremendous value, which is why I cannot have you undermining me. I just am not buying it. So sorry. And Sebastian's like, but we're partners. We've been together decades. Are you going to throw all of that away over this? And Edgar says, I'll give you until Monday to hand in your resignation because I don't want anything to be awkward at the wedding this weekend. And this is when Sebastian expresses some incredulity that he is even expected to still come to the wedding. And Edgar has the same attitude that I have, where this is just business. You're still my best man. And I really fucking, I agree with him. But I also wouldn't have fired him right here, right now. I would have waited until after the wedding to fire him at all. I don't know. And this is when Anik says, that doesn't sound like the Edgar I knew. That's cold as hell. He was very nice to me, actually. And Sebastian says that's because he didn't want anything from you. You were of absolutely zero value to him. And that kind of attitude, only being nice to people that you can get something from, maybe? I think that sounds like Sebastian a lot more than Edgar, So yeah, he says it was just like this ruthlessness that he had in business. And I couldn't take that lying down. The wedding was the perfect cover. But for a heist this big, I was going to need one hell of a, and then he says, Teddy. And it turns out he is getting a phone call and he gets interrupted here. He goes off to like continue chatting. And there was a part of me that felt like this interruption was not real. I don't know. It may have been, but there was like, it almost was like he's buying himself time to like finish the story to himself before he talks to them. This is the moment where we go back to Zoe's parents and they have to explain about the centerpieces. And then we come back to him talking about putting together a crew. I needed professionals that Edgar had never met before. Prison had actually been really great for me. And then we go into the prison, or no, he's not saying prison been great for me. That was Jasper talking, because then we go in and see him saying that he has been able to finish the album while he is inside. And he's talking to his attorney, trying to get him excited about like the possibilities of his album, which actually I feel like Jasper, having been a murderer of a famous artist and then coming out with an album, it would probably sell. I'm not saying he would have become a superstar and there would be a lot of people very disgusted with him, but that's a gimmick for sure. That's a very solid angle to be playing. And I feel like maybe somebody would be willing to pick that up on for him, Anyway, so the in the background is where we see Sebastian coming in. And I love that he's wearing this like leather jacket with the fucking like turtleneck underneath it. And he's meeting with his two cousins, Judson and Jackson. And it turns out Jackson is the angry waiter that I was sort of like, is he involved in this? When it was Anik's like, we were in his POV. I didn't like, he definitely stood out as being significant in some way, but I didn't really feel like, I was sort of joking, sort of serious, and finding out that this was him here. And then Judson is the DJ who was so weird. So yeah, this is fun. And they have the thing going on between the two of them that the brothers, I think it's Casey Affleck and can't remember who the other person is that he's working opposite, but they are in Ocean's 11 always bickering with one another, and they are often eating. And that's the role that these two play. And I love that when he's like, what if I could spring you out of here? And they just say, what's in it for us? And I was just like, what are you getting out? But he says, what if I could spring you? And we don't really get like an explanation of how that would even work. Judson says, we don't want your charity, which sounds like they're just saying, I could pay your bail, but they're in like actual prison here. They're not in jail, I didn't think, which would be like where you're held if you can't pay bail. I may be wrong, but it's just like we just skip right over getting them out and jump directly to them in some like room talking about Edgar and him showing them his picture and what it is, like the blueprint of the house and everything. There's no actual detail about how he managed to get them out so that they could work for him. And that was another major hole that I felt like, really? We're just going to fucking slide right past that? And nobody asks? Like, was weird. But maybe this is the thing that Danvers is doing. Maybe she's letting him skate past things so that she can point them out later. So we have the whole setup of how they wind up getting in with the staff at the wedding. And he had a like hidden camera that he put into place so that when Edgar went into his security vault, he could watch him enter the pin and like, because he knew that Edgar would ask him to leave the room. And then there's an actual box inside the safe that has a, what do you call it? It's got a 5-letter, I think it's a combination, but it's letters instead of numbers, a combination lock. And that turns out to be the thing that he sort of goes, Eureka, when he's talking to Travis and is like the horse. But it's not Bucephalus that he's reacting to. It's the idea of using the name of a horse as a password. And it turns out that Edgar's father had a horse that he was just like hugely attached to. And he needs to find out the name of it. But if he asks Edward if it is indeed the password, Edgar will know something is up. So he winds up having to go this like weird way about finding it out. We'll get to that. First, we have him coming to the rehearsal dinner and just like flirting with the maid of honor, introducing Uncle Ulysses. And after you spit all over Vivian, I had another drink and slipped off to Edgar's office. And this is when he runs into Travis. I love that he, like, the way that he presents Travis, he's got a lot more respect for Travis than I was thinking he would. It's either he's got more respect for him or he wants his account to sound impressive. And so he paints Travis as actually being a worthy adversary in the scene because he knows just having a bumbling idiot is not going to sound interesting or impressive. But yeah, here's the part where he's walking past this like spot where I don't remember who it is that he's talking to. Let's see. I had another drink and slipped off to Edgar's office. He passes by and he says, but on the way there, and you hear, I think it's supposed to be Edgar. Yeah, saying, I know your secret, Vivian, and if you don't tell it, I will. And she says, Edgar, please, there is more to this than you understand. And he just says, disagree, and walks away. I'm thinking, Vivian, maybe it was Ulysses that was Grace's father and not Fang. But I'm really leaping, and I recognize that. I'll acknowledge this. I have no evidence. I'm just doing a whole thing based on like the silhouettes in the intro, which is nothing. So anyway, as they're distracted with like Vivian's secret, he gets up and goes and gets a drink. And again, it just feels like he's just so in control of this room. At least that's what the way that Danvers is letting him think this is going. So yeah, he comes in, he realizes that it's the horse, and then he goes and he tries the champagne and glasses thing on, on Hannah, who immediately tells him to leave. And he decides to try it on Isabel as well, who is a little bit more receptive, but in a way that feels very, I'm going to play along with this because I think it's funny, but not really. I'm not actually going for this at all. And I love this. He says to her, you guys, I want you to ride me like your dead husband rode. And then there's this pause and he says, what was the name of his horse again? And she shoves him back and says, what is this? Did Edgar put you up to this? And he's like, what? Did your son send me here to sleep with you? I really, really want to know why she thinks that. And she later on says, I don't forget anything. Tell him I remember the horse's name was Nutmeg. So Edgar's like trying to get her to prove to him that she doesn't have like memory issues or something. Like, it's just, I don't know what it is, but she clearly is prepared for Edgar to be sort of tricksy with her. And it could be that he's actually being tricksy, or that she is so like weirdly addled and paranoid that that's all in her head and not actually happening. I'm really like at this point, low-key looking forward to an Isabel POV, because I genuinely don't know what kind of genre we would get for her. And I feel like things are going to come across looking crazy from her POV. But at this point, she literally draws like a katana and she gets him to leave her room with no clothes on. So this was the guy that we saw sprinting through the garden, buck-ass naked, which is like kind of what I had been expecting. I couldn't think who else it could have been, but also it was just such a weird moment that everybody acted like, well, we couldn't tell who it was. And he was in full fucking view. So anyway, yeah, he has to like run through and, we jump like back to the whole thing with the centerpieces and, you know, that explanation, like I said, I completely buy it. Then we go back to Sebastian. It was the morning of the wedding and I still didn't have the code to the horse box, but it was go time. So he goes to pick up his cousins at the hotel. And this explains why he just happened to be there to pick up Grace and Zoe's relatives. Because that was my big question, was like, how did he know? How, you know, he's the joke for Anik's POV is that this guy keeps being around to clean up Anik's messes. When he fucks up, this dude steps in and looks amazing. But it just was like very weird. Did he follow Anik there? Like, what is he doing? And now we find out these two dudes were thrown in the trunk and these guys are the ones who like thrust themselves forward and are like, oh, here's your ride, our ride, because apparently somebody was supposed to come for us and we're assuming. And these two just jump out of the trunk when they get there, which that I believe actually, like this part of the story does line up. So he goes to help Edgar get ready. This is when Edgar asks him to go get Anik because he wants to put the code in without being seen. And then we have the walking down the aisle and her saying the name of the horse was Nutmeg. And we find out the reason that he was so insistent about having a first dance was indeed because he was like buying time for Edgar to be distracted. He gets Grace really on board with the whole concept of this because he needs this guy to be out of his hair for a minute. And he set it up that Anik would take Roxana so that they could steal Roxana off of Anik's shoulder later. It turns out Roxana's face is what they use to get into the like one of the levels of security, which is amazing. I love that so much. And the whole like argument that this guy has with Anik is a distraction so that Sebastian can take her while Anik is like in the midst of this bizarre conversation with a server. So then we have Judson, who has to deliver this weird speech and also be part of the distraction. And let's see. Oh my God, I forgot about how his cousin is talking about his fourth divorce pending and how if she thinks she's getting that sea-doo, she's out of her mind. And I love this so much. It goes to Edgar speaking to Grace saying, divorce law doesn't cover watercraft. That's maritime law. I don't know why, you guys, but that like line, the detail itself and the cheerfulness with which the line is delivered, that cracked me up. That really got me. It was just so unexpected, you know? So this is when he uses Roxana's face to open the safe, and that sets off the alarm on Edgar's watch. So I had thought that was an alarm about the health of his lizard, but it's apparently just an alarm for somebody going into the safe itself, and you like the facial scanning, which is hilarious. I just love that so much. If we're to believe Sebastian, you know, I don't know. So he just has like, you know, a few minutes to put the Nutmeg name in, and he isn't aware that Edgar is coming for him because the reception of his earpiece in that little closet is not good. And when his cousin's trying to warn him, it gets all crackly and he can't hear. This is when we see Travis, who said something about how there's a criminal enterprise happening tonight, to the DJ, not realizing the DJ is involved in something. They are all paranoid that Travis is onto them, which is why Sebastian, I think, made Travis seem so much more competent. He thinks Travis was doing a whole different thing than what Travis was actually doing. And Travis is following him, but not really. He's following Edgar, we know. It just looks like he's following Edgar because he knows something more. So it turns out Travis was knocked out by Sebastian's cousin, in quotes. And Travis was telling the truth about that. So he eventually opens the safe, and you have this moment of thinking that he's going to take the crypto, and instead he reaches up and takes the Turner baseball card. And when Edgar comes in, he's like unsurprised that is what Sebastian went for. I'm only here for what's mine, but it's not yours. I want it fair and square. That was never fair. And he says, so why don't we play for it? And again, we have like a Connect 4 game, which allegedly that list is not code. It is the Connect 4 scores that he has kept for apparently years. Is it? SEC4, Sebastian Edgar Connect 4. I'm so sorry. I do not think so. I don't even it doesn't look like a scorecard. I don't understand how that even works as a scorecard. There are so many numbers on that. I mean, what, it doesn't make sense to me. Correct me if I'm wrong. So he's like, this was my one last chance to finally beat the house. And he does this sleight of hand thing again, where, they play the game. I love that in this version of it, Edgar has gold tokens that he's using instead of the usual black and red. They're gold. And eventually he does win. But before he wins, Sebastian accidentally tosses one of the coins on the floor, distracting Edgar. Edgar bends and picks it up and hands it back. And then he wins the card. And you see Sebastian looking really, really sad. And Edgar says, I'm going to let you have this. But actually, you can't take all of it. That would be too risky. What if I kept 20%? And he cuts the card up and tosses it back to him. Now, again, this just feels very vindictive. This does not feel like Edgar to me at all. This is silly. And he says, now get the hell out of my office. And we find out that it wasn't the real card. This was actually the card that was correctly printed and not worth anything. And that when he tossed the coin down, he replaced it. And so he has the complete misprint card undamaged. And the Turner card, the Thunder card, the correctly printed one, is the one that Edgar cut up. And I have to admit that I think Edgar would have noticed that it was correctly spelled. I think he would have zeroed in on that. But, and so Sebastian is claiming that at the after party, he wasn't drinking away his woes. He was celebrating. That was not a celebratory vibe, sir. It just wasn't. And then he says there was one thing there that might interest you. When I got to the bar, I saw Ulysses doing something to a glass. And when he comes up and asks for something, Ulysses is weirdly hiding one hand behind his back. I highly doubt that it had anything to do with doctoring a drink. I'm trying to think what is something that Ulysses would be embarrassed about. And honestly, the only thing I can imagine is like he was drinking Red Bull or something like that does not feel international and high end. That's the kind of energy I get off of what this guy would be embarrassed by. Because it feels like embarrassment hiding much more so to me than it feels like hiding a misdeed. The energy there just wasn't panicked enough for somebody who was doing something truly shady. But it could be that Ulysses is just cool as a cucumber, and maybe he's doing something truly shady and he's just not that worked up about it. I don't know. So anyway, this is when he says, I left millions in that safe. And this card is worth what, mid six figures? It's basically just sentimental value. And mid six figures as being just sentimental value, first of all, is wild to even say. But secondly, I don't know that you left millions in that safe. How much of that safe has been inspected? How do we know that what's there is what's supposed to be there? We don't know anything, So anyway, he gets another phone call and he just gets up and walks away when he feels like it. Once again, he's in control of the room. But it turns out Danner is no fool, as I already knew. And Anik is like so sure this is the guy. And she's like, dude, no, there's a whole like secret and there's a whole thing with Ulysses in the glass. And Anik is like, we can't interrogate her family. And she's like, the fuck we can't. The whole thing is that we need to stay objective. And this is when he brings up her drooling over Sebastian and she explains what the fuck she was doing. I love when she says it. And that's actually very smart. He starts to just be like shitty about it. But I'm supposed to be clearing Grace's name. Zoe is not going to like this. And I really need her parents to like me. And she says, don't make the same mistake I did. And he's like, the fuck does this mean? And she says, I wasn't exactly honest about why I left the force. I did some things I shouldn't have done because sometimes when you're too close to something, you can't see the truth. And I guess we're getting a Danner POV next instead of one of Zoe's family members, which I'm a little disappointed by, even though I'm sure it'll be fun. I just really, really wanted to see, like, really, even more than Zoe's parents, I want to see from Isabel's POV. But this is the moment when Grace goes down to see Hannah, and Hannah is cleaning the pool. She's pouring stuff into the pool and just saying, like, do your job. And I was sort of like, okay. I mean, I guess when Grace says cleaning the pool, Hannah just shrugs and says someone has to. And it felt like there was more going on here than what I knew. There's just a significance to the way they look at each other over this that seemed like, was the pool the site of something weird having happened? Like, is there a meaning to cleaning it up that's different than what it looks like? I don't know. Anyway, this is when Hannah says to her, I told them about us, but I didn't tell them everything. And Grace reaches up and like smooths her hair behind her ear in what feels very much like we're still involved kind of a gesture. And then we see Zoe all the way across the garden spotting this and sort of shooting to her feet like, what the fuck? Like she really didn't expect that her sister was hiding something. So that is the end of the episode. And yeah, I really don't know what to expect next, but this has been a really fun one. I'm really enjoying this. So I wonder how they're going to keep this going. I mean, for like, seasons coming up, if they keep the show going. I hope they do. I think it's well done. But you know how it is lately. Like streaming shows are they're on the chopping block when you least expect it. So anyway, thank you again so much to Max for commissioning this. I'm having a lot of fun. Thank you to everybody who's been listening. I hope you're enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.